English teachers of Reddit, what is the most disturbing story/assessment a student has ever submitted? Someone wrote fanfiction of her, and Kermit the Frog and I have not been the same since. Edit. I forgot to mention I teach college English. This class was freshmen seniors. Students were annotating old news articles about a very famous axe murderer from the late 1800s. One student includes an annotation about how the article reminded her of her father. She helpfully included his name for me to Google, and yep, that is how I found out my student's dad is literally an axe murderer. Second place goes to a student who wrote from the POV of the Zodiac Killer for a creative writing assignment. It was incredibly well written. If it had not been, it honestly might have not been so disturbing. But being in the killer's head as he ties up and stabs young couples to death. No thanks. Oh, and last week someone submitted a horror story in creative writing. I swear to God, she could be a writer for Saw movies. The deaths were graphic and gruesome, and creative? I had to take breaks while reading it, because I am pretty squeamish. It might get buried, but I need to chime in, mostly in the hopes that this student finds my comment and knows how much his story stuck with me. The first paper assignment of the semester was to write about life at the university through a sociological lens. This guy who was social, well liked, in a frat turned in this shocking story. He was writing about how hard his life was, how he had to scrounge for meals from the trash, while seeing all the other students eat happily in the dining halls. He described how he'd seen his friends struck by cars on the winding mountain roads on campus. I was so taken aback, and I kept reading anxiously to see if his story would take a turn. A squirrel. The student was writing from the perspective of a squirrel. This kid was a genius. I told him later how impressed I was, and he shrugs in a very bro way, stating that's the worst thing I've ever written. If you see this, Matt, that's still my favorite paper by a student. Maybe not exactly what you were looking for, but I am an ESL teacher. One class, we were talking about different holidays and how we celebrate them. This one student was trying to explain Mothra's Day, but did not know the exact name of it. When I asked him to explain the holiday, so I could tell him the name we use, he said, Arita's a day, where I pleasure my mortaro. I teach, but not English. I once had to write up a middle school student. I don't remember for what, but it was serious, since I hate writing up, and they turned in their assignment for that day with none of it done. In its place was a half-page description of all the things their dad would do to them if he found out they were written up again. It started pretty mild, say, take the phone away, to more serious things like no food or water. By the time I saw it, they were already out the door, so I hopped over to the counselor and let them have a copy of it. Not sure what happened after that, since it was out of my hands, and I am not sure if it was even true or not. They tended to be overdramatic and stretch the truth in class, but I took it very seriously. I have definitely been more purposeful and welcoming in my interactions with them from here on out. Got to make sure that the classroom is a safe and good place for them. Nothing much, just edgy murder fantasies. I'm just glad they're writing more than 3 sentences and using somewhat correct grammar. I was the student. We were told to create an invention that'll help the human race. Basically write 3 paragraphs down and turn it in. Several classmates came up with machines to stop cancer, medical equipment, things to help homeless people, imiter loss. So I decided to rip off the suicide machine from Futurama and basically wrote down that you can choose fast/slow/painful/painless death. It can help people who have painful diseases die for just a quarter. Needless to say, I was put on suicide watch and had a counselor until I graduated high school. To the question, if you could have anything in the world, what would it be? A 17-year-old replied, a gun, so that I could kill people I hate. Okay then. 8th grade English back quote. I do an annual scary story contest and damn, 8th graders can get nasty. One story was about a family meat processing business, and when the kids are old enough, they learn the family secret, which is, of course, that they butcher humans for their signature meat. Another one was about some teenagers camping, and the Wendigo got them. The detail was amazing though, blood spattered over their tents, etc. However, I have gotten plenty of extremely sad stories. We do a memoir about a rare moment when time stood still lower, and there have been many stories about CPS coming to take kids away, or parents going to jail. One student was in a car accident which took his grandpa's life. Can someone link the Oedipus thing that was on multicolored paper with vulgarity? I have been given some pretty gruesome horror stuff, but it is usually based on crap the students have watched. This week alone I have read 2 Red Dead Redemption 2 ripoffs, so I'd settle for anything original. Had a student submit a paper about growing up with an addict teen brother. He had the room next to her, and sometimes when getting clean the parents would lock him in his room and he would have raging withdrawals. She was very young, so I imagine there was a lot of medical care and therapy going on that she didn't know about. She just remembered that her brother was screaming and crying in the next room, and she would sit in her closet all night long terrified he was going to break through the wall and get her. It was such a heart-rending story, and it made me view what families go through in such a different light. Had my kids write a forks cover letter for a year abroad in Australia in which they among other things had to give reasons why they wanted to go to Australia. Here's what one of my students came up with. I'd like to see some wild animals, koalas, kangaroos and maybe some aborigines. Guy claimed that it wasn't meant to be as racist as it looks at first glance, and that he simply messed up the construction, and I actually tend to believe it, seeing how this was an ESL class in Germany and he really wasn't one of the top students in his class. But then, in another essay, would you rather do an internship or a paid summer job? He said that he'd do the summer job, so he'd have money for gambling, so he definitely was a bit on the weird side. Teaching high school in Texas, my first year of full-time teaching, and assign a personal narrative to a group of HS seniors. First assignment of the year, designed to roll into college application essays. Had a girl turn in an essay that related her experiences of traveling to get an abortion. In it, she described the agony of the decision, the inability to tell her father, the trip on the road, and the abortion procedure. It was all delivered in the same monotone, deliberately so, tone, and established a chilling atmosphere. It was heartbreaking and riveting. When I had a parent-teacher interview with her parents a few weeks later, all I could think about was that their daughter went through this, and the father had no idea, but I did, her English teacher. I taught English in Korea for a short time to 5 to 7-year-olds, and one of the kids was literally the sweetest little human. Big heart, wiped tears from his classmates' cheeks when they were upset, and always strove to use English whenever he could. Altogether a really good kid. His birthday came around, and all of the students in his class wrote birthday letters to him which would then be laminated and presented to him as a book. While we did that, this student wrote a letter to his parents, and what he wrote absolutely broke my heart. Dear Mom and Dad, please come back please. I loves you. I later found out that both of his parents worked overseas frequently, and he lived with his grandmother. He only saw them once a year or so. My heart. Poor, sweet child. I think of him often. I used to teach refugees in Boston, and there were a lot of casual segues into like, the death of their entire family. Assignment would be something like compare this character's struggle to a struggle, and my students would be like, yes, in this book, Gatsby believes he can get what he wants with money, but he fails. I relate to this because of the time I tried to bribe the guards to get my family out of a prison camp, but instead they shot us all, and I spent 4 days lying under the bodies of my children pretending to be dead. This has been my report on The Great Gatsby by John F. Fitzgerald. Thank you. I'll answer from the student's perspective. I was a quiet guy in high school and did not talk to a lot of people, as my friends all went to other schools. As a result, people thought I was a tad strange, but hey, what can you do? We get an assignment in English, write a short story, can be about anything you want, be as long as you want, etc. So I eventually write about a quiet loner, genuinely not a self-insert as I did not see myself that way, who wakes up to find his small town is completely empty except for him, and how he finds happiness for the first time in his life through solitude. At the end of the story it was revealed that he really had snapped and killed everybody and gone into a crazed mental state after having enough of dealing with people all day and convinced himself they had just all left. It was decently dramatic, and I was pretty proud of it, but my teacher assumed the character was a self-insert and seemed very concerned. This reminds me of the time when my little brother wrote a story about our cat that got squished with a door. The teacher contacted my mom saying that she was worried, and if the story was true, we don't have a cat. My father was an English teacher at an inner city school, and he used to pay me to grade his papers once I was old enough. He checked them after I did. There was one I remember vividly. The student wrote about how he was forced to sell drugs to help his family make it through the month financially. He wrote about it in slang, so if you didn't know you would have no idea what he was talking about. So if my father had read it first he likely wouldn't have figured it out, but I was a little stoner, so I knew exactly what he meant. I told my dad, and he ended up getting the kid some help, and he was a great student in the end. A kid wrote a whole story detailing exactly how he was going to murder me. He came in with a knife a month later and tried to stab another boy in the back. I hope he's doing better now. I worked with my 8th graders to do a research project titled College Bound, where they looked up information on the college they would one day like to attend after high school. As expected, most of the athletes selected big name universities with strong football/basketball/baseball teams. One of the items they had to present was what they wanted to major in. Almost every male athlete I had responded with they wanted to major in a specific sport. When I pointed out to the first presenter that you cannot major in football, they all tried to argue it with me. The sole basis for their argument was, how do you think professional football/basketball/baseball players come from? They continued to believe they could major in a sport, even after they were told by everyone, including their coaches, and they looked up lists that such a major did not exist. I had a student that was in the Istanbul airport when it was bombed a few years back. We wrote slam poems and she wrote about that whole experience. Saw blood, rush of crowds, hand reaching out as she was pulled away from her family due to people just running for their lives. She was a 6th grader. It was really raw and hard to read for me. I was sent to the counselor for a story I wrote for history class. We had to write a story about the Oregon Trail. Mine was about a man and his hired hand, a black dude named Deli, who would steal from other wagons on their way out west. One woman catches them and shoots them dead. The teacher was concerned and told the counselor, who told me the teacher said I'd written a graphic murder scene about a guy and his girlfriend Ellie. We both agreed that the teacher was being dense, and she sent me on my way. I'm an online writing tutor for a company that many big universities tell their students to use. I recently completed a markup on an essay written by a student in a philosophy class. They had to tell an incident that happened to them and compare it to an ancient philosopher. This girl seriously wrote about a time she did an accidental hit and run on a car and didn't so much as leave a note. She wrote that philosophically, this was the best case scenario because it served as a catalyst for the happiness of the greater subset of people involved. This was because she only had a learner's permit, so it was better for her to not get in trouble, and she had 3 other friends in the car whose time would have been wasted when they were just trying to get to the club. And it was really fine for the other person because they should have insurance, so everyone wins. This was a real essay, college level. Mind blown.